Right now, Trump has delivered a verdict on Putin. No one expected this. The Ukrainian armed forces will receive a lot of deadly weapons. America has simply gone crazy. Incredible supplies for the Ukrainian armed forces. An emergency order from the White House. Urgent attack on Estonia. Russia has moved forward. This surprised everyone. A deadly strike by the Ukrainian armed forces. Russia was simply blown to pieces. The aftermath of the attack is blowing up the internet. The trap in Donbas has snapped shut. Azov has done the unbelievable. Many Russian casualties. Putin can no longer hide it. A meeting between Zelensky and Putin has been decided. Unexpected details. All this and more in our program Hotspot. Sensation. This is a real victory for the Ukrainian armed forces. Trump is going all in. Harsh revenge on Putin. The Ukrainian armed forces will receive something incredible. The White House has approved the sale of 1,000 missiles to Ukraine. This has never happened before. What kind of missiles are these and what targets can they strike? And how could the delivery of these missiles turn the tide at the front? Watch this.
An American congratulation for Ukraine's Independence Day. Following Keith Kellogg, American cruise missiles will be sent to Ukraine.
It is an honor for me to present you with this award. Thank you.
According to the Wall Street Journal, the Donald Trump administration has approved the sale to Ukraine of more than 3,000 extended-range attack munition air-launched missiles.
It should be noted that neither the Pentagon nor the White House has officially confirmed the information about the sale of air-launched missiles to Ukraine, which, according to media reports, are supposed to be delivered to the Ukrainian side within the next 6 weeks. Therefore, we can say that this is a so-called controlled information leak. That is when the Russian Federation is made aware of the White House administration's plans.
A few days earlier, Russian terrorists launched a missile strike on an American company's factory in western Ukraine. Essentially, Putin nullified Trump's claim that the presence of American business in Ukraine is, in itself, a guarantee of security.
What did you say to Vladimir Putin about yesterday's strike on the American factory in Ukraine?
I told him that I was not happy about it. I'm not happy about anything that's happening in this war.
Sometime later, the President of the United States made an important statement. Donald Trump admitted that Ukraine cannot win the war by only defending itself.
It's very difficult, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking the aggressor country, just as if a great sports team with a fantastic defense were not allowed to play offense. There's no chance of victory. It's the same with Ukraine and Russia. The dishonest and terribly incompetent Joe Biden did not allow Ukraine to fight back, only to defend itself. And what came of it?
According to experts, the supply of long-range air-launched missiles is Trump's logical response to the demonstrated unwillingness of the Russian dictator to negotiate.
The so-called aloesi, that is, a retaliatory strike from the United States. Moreover, I do not rule out that, along with the possible supply of strike weapons, permission will also be granted to carry out a retaliatory strike on the territory of the Russian Federation.
The key aspect of the supply of American air-to-surface missiles, which, as reported, have been paid for by Ukraine's European allies, is their large quantity, specifically 3,350 missiles, and their strike range up to 450 kilometers.
450 kilometers covers virtually the entire rear infrastructure of the Russian occupation army directly on the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Additionally, if permission is granted to use these strike assets on the territory of the Russian Federation, this would encompass the entire rear logistics of the Russian army, and accordingly, legitimate military targets on Russian territory. This is significantly, almost by a third, greater than the technical and tactical specifications of the American attack EMS.
The combination of the number and range of ERA missiles means that, unlike the scarce Storm Shadow and ATACMS, these missiles can be used much more frequently, including for precision strikes against fighters, bombers, and launchers of the occupying army.
First and foremost, it appears that air bases will be the primary focus of increased attention from the Ukrainian defense forces, plus, accordingly, the launchers and sites. These are respectively the locations from which UAVs and likewise cruise and ballistic missiles are launched on the territory of the Russian Federation.
Urgent. The Kremlin is hiding a disaster. It has been burning for 5 days already. An oil collapse in the Russian Federation. Ukrainian armed forces drones have done the incredible. Sensational. Ukraine delivers a devastating strike. This is the liberation of Donbas. It will reach beyond the Urals. Ukraine has unveiled a new deadly missile. These shots will surprise you. All the details are in the report.
A successful offensive operation. The occupiers lost about a company of personnel, The main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense and the Third Corps drove out the Russians and regained control over the settlement of Novomikhailivka in the Donetsk region.
This allows the Ukrainian defense forces to strengthen their defensive positions in this direction and moreover to improve the capabilities of the Ukrainian defense forces in using unmanned aerial vehicles and accordingly taking into account the terrain to improve the overall nature of the Ukrainian defense forces positions for further repelling attacks by the occupiers.
The Kremlin is striving to seize the entire territory of the Donetsk region, which has long been a target of the Russian dictator. In particular, he has stated that he would freeze the war in exchange for full control over the region, but the defense forces continue to push the enemy back and fight for every inch of Ukrainian land.
At the moment, the occupiers have set themselves the task of taking control of the largest industrial centers. These are Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka and Kostiantynivka, plus the Pokrovsk agglomeration, Pokrovsk and the peaceful city of Dobropilia. In other words, the occupiers are well aware of the scenario ahead, extremely heavy losses in personnel and equipment, and accordingly an active nature of hostilities, which according to British intelligence could drag on for several years. This is called the so-called up to 5 years scenario for establishing full control over the Donetsk region. That is why, accordingly, the occupiers are trying to exert military and political pressure on both the United States and Ukraine.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces are successfully attacking the enemy in the rear. Special Operations Forces and the Security Service of Ukraine struck an infrastructure facility at the Ust-Luga seaport terminal in the Leningrad region. The Ust-Luga seaport terminal is considered one of Russia's key logistics hubs in the Baltic Sea. It is actively used for exporting energy resources via the so-called Shadow Fleet, which operates in circumvention of international sanctions.
It should be noted that the Ust-Luga port has already been repeatedly targeted by strikes from the Ukrainian Defense Forces and the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. This concerns the Novatek terminals, which are a key supplier of finished products. Once again, I want to emphasize that we are talking about petroleum products delivered to end consumers such as India, the People's Republic of China, as well as a number of European consumers.
The Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery, the only operating refinery in the Rostov region and the main supplier of petroleum products in southern Russia, has been burning for the 4th day in a row.
Yes, we're now approaching the designated site, carefully moving to a safe distance.
Oh, it'll go, it'll go.
More!
Yeah, it hasn't stopped for even a single minute at all.
Since the beginning of August, at least 10 major Russian energy facilities, including refineries, have been hit by drone strikes. At least 4 plants have halted production. Meanwhile, as Russia deals with the aftermath, Ukraine has unveiled its new Long Neptune missile for the first time. It is capable of striking targets at a distance of up to 1,000 kilometers.
Initially, the R-360 Neptune missile had a range of about 280 kilometers. The warhead has also been upgraded. Previously, the warhead weighed about 150 kilograms. At present, the technical specifications have not been disclosed, but it is reported that the warhead of this missile has been significantly increased.
Ukrainian Marines have also showcased their own surface drone, the Barracuda. The drone's design features a modular system that allows for the use of various types of weaponry. The released video shows the use of single-shot grenade launchers. The drone is also capable of mining the water area. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has approved the sale to Ukraine of more than 3,000 air-launched missiles and rams with a strike range from 250 to 450 kilometers.
These missiles are intended for destroying ground and naval targets. Once again, I want to draw attention to the quantity and the technical and tactical characteristics. In other words, this means that at the moment, if the United States gives a positive decision, Ukraine's defense forces could have total control over legitimate military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation, including up to Moscow. The thing is, these missiles have been specifically modified for the F-16s, which have already been delivered to the Ukrainian side, and there are about 100 of these aircraft. And accordingly, if they enter Russian airspace, the range for striking legitimate targets on Russian territory increases significantly.
The deal is included in a military aid package worth $850 million, which is largely funded by European countries and provides for the supply of a number of other weapons.
Shock! Estonia is opening a new front. Russian propagandists are in a panic, shouting from TV screens about an impending nightmare. Is Stalin really preparing to attack Russia? Or is it the Kremlin deliberately stirring up hysteria against its Baltic neighbors? The truth, which will surprise you, is coming up in this story.
Kremlin propagandists have received new directives from above, along with fresh talking points from Putin. It seems the bunker dweller has finally decided whom he wants to attack next, and has already begun the ideological preparation of the population for another invasion. Now, the Kremlin has set its sights on one of the NATO countries, namely Estonia.
The Estonian Foreign Ministry has banned its citizens from traveling to Russia. Special attention should be paid to an article in the Polish publication On It, which states that Estonia is ready to launch a preemptive strike against Russia. Estonia against Russia.
And even though Estonia is 300 times smaller than Russia, and it seems that even the Kremlin propagandists themselves don't take such a scenario seriously on their broadcasts, an order is an order, which means the population of Eritrea needs to be actively prepared for a new military conflict.
Estonia plans to increase its military spending to 5.4% of GDP within 4 years. And right now, Estonia is already strengthening its border with our country. The federal authorities are erecting barriers along more than 300 kilometers. The civilian population is preparing for a hypothetical conflict with Moscow. People in the border regions are building personal underground bunkers in case of nuclear war and joining the so-called Defense League in case a conventional war breaks out.
And this is absolutely true. Estonia is preparing not to attack but to defend itself from Putin, especially since the Russian Foreign Ministry officially considers the Baltics a potential zone for another conflict.
The Journal of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Affairs published an article about the Baltic Sea in which it suggested considering it a potential theater of military operations.
This is a specific operation by Russian special services aimed at destabilizing the situation in our country. We are constantly experiencing various provocations directed at us. This is ongoing, and we are constantly prepared for more serious provocations and aggression, and as they say, we are waiting for it. In other words, we are ready for this and prepared to defend ourselves.
And with each passing day, there are more and more Russian provocations at the border with Estonia. We're talking about everything from cyber attacks to mysterious jamming of satellite signals. The Kremlin doesn't hesitate to use its reconnaissance drones on the territory of a NATO country. Meanwhile, official Tallinn is already actively preparing to repel potential Russian occupiers, increasing defense spending, conducting exercises, and hastily mining its borders with Russia in case of a military invasion.
Russia does not choose its means in this brutal war it is waging. It violates all sorts of agreements it itself has joined. First and foremost, we must focus on how to protect our country, NATO, and the EU. Estonia will, without a doubt, approach this very responsibly.
In Estonia, the current prevailing trend is precisely that we fully realize, unfortunately, and I must emphasize this regrettably, unfortunately, especially after President Donald Trump came to assume the presidency of the White House, that we absolutely must be able to effectively deal with any potential aggression or hostile actions from the Russian Federation entirely on our own. Right now, at this very moment, we are diligently putting a substantial amount of concerted effort into ensuring that we are completely ready and fully prepared to defend ourselves independently and autonomously.
And this is completely at odds with the Kremlin's plans. As military analysts explain, given the pace at which the defensive line is being built in Estonia and the endless string of failures suffered by the Russian army in the war in Ukraine, Putin simply does not have the resources or means to open a full-fledged second front. Which means there is only one scenario left, an information war, primarily targeting the Russian-speaking population of the Baltic countries.
So the largest group consists of those who are ready for all these challenges and support any government initiatives to strengthen our defense capabilities. The second group, which unfortunately is also not small in our country, I don't even know how to describe them. Vatniks, Putinists, Russian speakers, the fifth column. Well, there are many names for them. So this is a group of people who, while the first group is preparing to fight back in anticipation of aggression, this second group is waiting for Putin to send in troops to finally liberate them and destroy this damned Estonia, because with every fiber of their being, with all their insides, they hate Estonia. Estonia as a state, Estonia as a culture, Estonia as a language, and everything about our way of life. They simply hate it and can't wait for Putin to give them the order to start wreaking havoc here.
Relying on such supporters of the Russian world, Putin is planning to invade a neighboring country.
That is precisely why analysts tend to believe the bunker dweller chose comparatively small Estonia as a potential victim. With a population of less than 1.4 million people, small Russian sabotage groups, under the right circumstances and with the support of Estonia's Russian-speaking population, could try to repeat in Tallinn the scenario of the 2014 annexation of Crimea and Donbas.
Small groups of unidentified men without insignia seize in classic fashion the post office, telephone exchange, telegraph, ATM, electronics store, and liquor market, just as we saw in Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. And after that, the creation of some sort of territorial autonomy is proclaimed. The local population enthusiastically supports it, cheering, hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. Tanks are brought in, and that's it. It's a sovereign republic now, which asks Putin to annex them. So once again, in Donetsk, we saw a small number of genuinely pro-Russian citizens who, in a situation where the authorities were paralyzed and indecisive, managed to organize barricades, seize district police stations, back when it was still the militia, and gained access to firearms. And it really was an avalanche-like movement that was almost impossible to stop, even with the use of the army.
It is precisely this scenario that Russian propagandists are actively discussing on their TV broadcasts. According to their scare stories, Estonia wouldn't last even a few days, and the North Atlantic Alliance wouldn't have time to react before Russian tanks are supposedly under the windows of all the major cities in Europe.
And after that, it's Paris, Berlin, and upon the very ruins of Washington, we will indeed write our own humble names. So that's basically the mood.
But all these wet dreams of Putin and his propagandists are never going to come true. According to analysts, instead of swallowing Estonia, the Kremlin will break its teeth on it. No matter how many supporters of the Russian world live in the Baltic countries, all of them support Putin from the comfort of their own homes, with warm apartments, running water and heating, good pensions, and all the other benefits of life in Europe. And Estonia is no exception here.
This country ranks 10th in the world for quality of life, 6th for economic freedom, and 12th in the Corruption Perceptions Index. By the way, Russia is ranked 141st. It holds first place in Europe for the quality of school education and 4th in the world. The country is consistently at the top of all sorts of other rankings as well. For example, it has the highest number of startups in Europe.
And it's unlikely that even the most ardent supporters of the Russian world would want to trade all this for life in Russia, with its corruption, unemployment, and Putin's total rule.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Urgent! Zelensky is heading to negotiations with Putin. This is the real reason why Keith Kellogg came. Vance leaked something unexpected, a new date for the end of the war. And the friendship is over. Hungary hysterically appealed to Zelensky. You need to hear this. All the details coming up.
The Kremlin continues to skillfully distract attention. Lavrov stated that Moscow rejects the US conditions for establishing peace in Ukraine, but at the same time blames Zelensky himself for everything. Supposedly, he is refusing all proposals.
Trump raised all these issues at a meeting in Washington where Zelensky and his European sponsors were present. He made it clear that there are several principles that, according to Washington, must be accepted, including renouncing NATO membership and discussing territorial issues. And Zelensky said no to all of this. He even refused to repeal the law banning the Russian language. How can we meet with a man who only pretends to be a leader?
Of course, Lavrov couldn't help but mention the meeting with Putin, even though Zelensky has repeatedly stated his readiness. But it was actually the Kremlin that spoke of some serious and lengthy preparations with no set deadlines. But now they are once again blaming the president of Ukraine.
He says his immediate priority is a meeting with Putin. But this is simply a game. A game he knows how to play exceptionally well because he consistently desires and actively seeks out drama in absolutely everything he undertakes. He genuinely does not care about the actual substance or true essence of anything.
But they have to blame someone, right? Just not themselves.
In actual fact, after the significant events in Washington, following that particular and rather impactful incident that specifically happened, the Russian Federation's presence basically disappeared completely from the entire information space for a period of 3 full days. They can't afford to offend Trump, so accordingly, they have to shift the responsibility onto someone else. Because, of course, Putin was not going to meet with Zelensky, is not going to and does not plan to.
As stated by the European Commissioner for Security and Space, Andrius Kubilius, Moscow is simply afraid that Ukraine will actually receive real security guarantees, because that would complicate the planning of new aggression.
An absolutely and unequivocally correct statement of fact, which is strongly supported by compelling and irrefutable evidence. Russia does not genuinely desire any truly effective security guarantees for Ukraine, because it is firmly set, let's say, on the complete and utter destruction not just of the Ukrainian state, since it demonstrably cannot achieve this devastating goal by purely military means. It is, as before, intent on destroying Ukrainian statehood.
Meanwhile, Vance suggested a possible end date for the war. He said it could end within the next 6 months. He also expressed optimism regarding Trump's policies.
We are trying to negotiate with both the Russians and the Ukrainians to find a compromise and stop the killings. I think the president has tried to conduct very active, very energetic diplomacy here.
The 6 months that Vance specifically mentioned, of course, they are absolutely not based on any precise calculations by American think tanks or any other similar organizations. It's simply a rather figurative, let's say, a conceptual and virtual positioning. One absolutely shouldn't expect that such an incredibly complex, deeply entrenched, and profoundly significant conflict between the nations of Russia and Ukraine can be resolved in merely 2 days or even 2 short weeks.
And Andriy Sybiha responded to the accusations from Hungary's foreign ministry regarding threats to their state from President Volodymyr Zelensky.
I'll answer in the Hungarian style. There's no need to tell the president of Ukraine what to do or say, or when to do it. He is the president of Ukraine, not of Hungary. Hungary's energy security is in your own hands. Diversify and become independent from Russia, just like the rest of Europe.
On August 25th, Germany's Minister of Finance Lars Klingbeil arrived in Ukraine on an unexpected visit, and upon arrival stated that Ukraine can continue to rely on Germany's unwavering support.
Perhaps not publicly, but the government of Germany will now be considering specific industrial and technological clusters much more concretely. Let's put it this way, focusing on extensive joint military-industrial cooperation with Ukraine, which is a very important and strategic partnership. In fact, in some significant ways, this particular situation is even much more profoundly interesting because it represents a much more concrete and tangible signal than, for example, the recent visit of Merz.
Meanwhile, the German foreign minister stated that concessions from Ukraine are only possible when it receives real security guarantees, essentially guarantees equivalent to NATO membership. Without this, demanding the return of territories is simply impossible. Well, at least it's good that someone in Europe understands this.
Exclusive. The Ukrainian armed forces have decisively destroyed a column of Russian troops. There are heaps of casualties. There hasn't been such a rout before. A loud failure for Putin. The Kremlin gathered a horde near Pokrovsk, but the offensive turned into a fiasco. Up next in the report, all the latest footage from the front lines. What's happening at the front? Watch.
Russia has gathered a horde near Pokrovsk, enough to capture an average European country, but they achieved no result. Putin's plans for Ukraine's Independence Day are falling apart. The Ukrainian armed forces launched an attack in the Sumy region and pushed the occupiers out of yet another settlement, as well as the massive destruction of a Russian column in the Donetsk region. We've gathered the most important frontline news from the past 24 hours for you. The occupiers decided to unleash hell on earth for our defenders holding the approaches to Pokrovsk, according to the Dnipro Operational Strategic Group of Forces. There, the Russians have concentrated a number of troops twice the pre-war population of Pokrovsk itself, which allows the Russian army to storm Ukrainian positions almost around the clock.
First, the ambitious goal is to control the outskirts of Pokrovsk in order to gain control over Pokrovsk itself. The second is to exert pressure toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. And of course, in the Lyman area. In the Lyman direction, the main pressure is toward the Serebryansky forestry. Somewhere there, they have the ambition to reach the Slovyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. Well, let's just say no one can forbid them from dreaming.
Likewise, the Russian plan to present a bunker dweller with a gift for Ukraine's Independence Day in this region ended in failure. According to the military, the recent intensification of assaults toward Kupiansk was specifically tied to this date. But even here, aside from the increased number of occupier casualties, it didn't really lead to anything.
The Russian occupiers gave their troops a clear order to capture the city of Kupiansk by Independence Day. This had two meanings. The first meaning is political, since Kupiansk is one of the symbols of the strength of the Ukrainian army, because it was deoccupied in 2022, and now it was important for the enemy to take it back politically before Independence Day. And of course, it's also a logistical hub. Today, Kupiansk remains under the blue and yellow flag. In other words, one way or another, we managed to hold out, and the enemy was unable to carry out their intentions on our land.
Another hotspot on the battle map remains Chasiv Yar. The enemy managed to seize part of the settlement, but was stopped in the middle of the residential area. As a result, the objectives for which the city was stormed for over a year have still not been achieved.
Since their control over Chasiv Yar is incomplete, even though Putin himself pointed this out during his meeting with Lukashenko, they are currently unable to make use of it. The same story applies to their incomplete control over the city of Toretsk, where they have, without a doubt, taken a significant part of it. But since they cannot get through the city itself and move further, once again, for now, this brings them no real benefit. That's why now they're dreaming of advancing on Kostiantynivka from the Pokrovska direction.
Meanwhile, in the Donetsk region, the Ukrainian armed forces are not only managing to repel attacks, but also delivering quite impressive strikes. For example, the fighters of the Phoenix unit reported that the day before, they destroyed a Russian column, and at the same time, at least half a dozen Russian soldiers. The footage shows several assault troops on motorcycles trying to break through closer to Ukrainian positions. One after another, at least half a dozen occupiers were methodically sent to Kobzon's concert. At the same time, they managed to destroy 4 motorcycles and a self-propelled Emsta-S howitzer. Meanwhile, in the Sumy region, the Ukrainian armed forces have come out of a deep defense and are moving forward. Deep state analysts report that the defense forces have driven the occupiers out of yet another settlement. This refers to the village of Andriivka in the Sumy region. The corresponding changes can already be seen on the online battle map.
Shock! Russia is paralyzed. Trains are not running. In Russia, more than 70 trains were delayed after a drone attack. And this is just the beginning. The Ukrainian armed forces regularly strike at enemy logistics. The Kremlin is losing everything. Real chaos has begun in Russia. What colossal damage is this causing the enemy? Watch.
There is a massive collapse in Russia after the overnight drone attack.
There are 2 of them flying somewhere. One is flying right here. That way in the same direction. They're all heading in the same direction.
Planes aren't flying and trains are stuck in the middle of the tracks.
But right now, we need to hold on a little longer. These aren't just empty words, this is a matter of life.
In the Voronezh region, a drone crash damaged the overhead power lines, causing serious disruptions to train traffic. Officially, Russian railways announced that 71 long-distance trains are delayed. The maximum delay reaches 5.5 hours.
So here we are, moving along slowly. Then sometimes we stop and just stand there for a while.
A railway station in the Volgograd region, which is used in the occupiers' military logistics, was also hit.
Strikes are being carried out not only on the stations themselves, like the attack on the Lysky station in the Voronezh region, but also, accordingly, on the railway tracks themselves, including sabotage. But first and foremost, active operations are being carried out, namely sabotage actions at logistical facilities. These include bridges and, accordingly, transfer stations along the route. And this makes it possible to completely undermine the logistics of the occupying army. Thanks to these successful actions, the Russian side was forced to admit that the redeployment of operational units from the operational reserve of the Russian armed forces to the immediate combat zone has been blocked.
This is the 18th consecutive attack on the railway infrastructure in the south, which has disrupted the supply of ammunition and personnel to the occupying army. After all, the railway network is the most important logistical artery for Putin's troops.
Strikes are also being carried out on rolling stock, which reduces logistical capabilities. The latest successful example is the strikes on the railway convoy transporting fuel and lubricants in the Zaporizhzhia region near the occupied town of Tokmak. The occupiers were forced to admit the high effectiveness of this type of strike at the moment, both in terms of blocking railway traffic and accordingly destroying rolling stock.
By the way, Drones have repeatedly attacked vital railway stations in the Rostov and Volgograd regions, causing significant hours-long delays for numerous trains heading to southern Russia and back.
Our train is being delayed. We've been standing in Belaya Kalitva for 3 hours already. The newsfeed says train delays are up to 7 hours. There is a threat of a UAV attack. And no other news. We're just waiting for now.
It's 1750. It's 31 degrees Celsius in the carriage, and the delay has already reached 10 hours.
In July, more than 130 passenger trains were delayed due to damage to the overhead lines. Both long-distance and suburban trains were affected, including those heading to the annexed Crimea.
Then in another place. They didn't manage to deliver the food here or there in time. But on social media, the carrier wrote that everyone was provided with everything they needed. But in reality, it was only when we reached Voronezh, around 3-something in the morning, that someone came to us and gave us a bottle of water each, some crackers that were about to expire, and instant noodles.
As a result of the disruption of Russian railways operations, there are currently shortages of fuel and lubricants in the territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, which is temporarily occupied by Russian forces. And accordingly, there are problems with fuel and lubricants, and it's impossible to deliver them to the end consumer in the Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk regions. And this is an indicator of the effectiveness of operations of this kind. That is, Russians are feeling the consequences not only psychologically, but first and foremost in the inability to refuel their personal vehicles.
Russia is gradually being overtaken by railway chaos. And Russians themselves are increasingly feeling the consequences of the war unleashed by the Kremlin against Ukraine.
My dear ones, I truly understand how very hard this is for you.
That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.